Good morning. I am Ashley Hopkins-Benton. I'm a senior historian and curator here at the New York State Museum. And today I'm meeting virtually with Lucy Bohnsack. Lucy has engaged with her community of Catskill, New York in the Hudson Valley during COVID, during the pandemic, to continue to work on her photography and explore her community and the ways that the pandemic has influenced it. And Lucy was a recent donor to the New York State Museum's history collections of some of these works that came out of this project. So good morning, Lucy. I'm so glad to have you here today.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
So I thought we would start with what inspired you as the world started to change in March and COVID hit and everything locked down to begin looking at that situation through your photography.
I think that it's a normal process for me in my photography to kind of absorb the world through images. I kind of make images and then bring them home and kind of figure out my thoughts and my feelings and what's going on through the images. That's just always been a way that I work. And during the pandemic, it was no different. I mean, I have an obsession with history, and I was watching history unfold before my eyes, but it was incredibly difficult, obviously, because schools shut down. I have two little kids, and the children were home with me full time. I had just had a moment of freedom. My son had started a daycare finally in September of 2019. So he had been in there a few months when all of this happened. So I had to kind of figure out a way to record this history that was happening, but from my home in a very limited, I didn't have much mobility because I was home with them all the time. So it really was, it was a process, and it's still a process. I mean, it's crazy to talk about because we're still deep in it, but yeah, it was definitely a process.
Well, I think it's interesting, and as we talked back and forth before this interview, there's a lot of similarities for a photographer in this world thinking about how to process and preserve what's going on, and a curator in this world trying to think about how to process and collect and tell this story for the future. So I think
Yeah, absolutely, and especially in the beginning. One of the first photo I'd say that kicked off all of my work is a photo of an empty shelf in a grocery store. And I remember that vividly as definitely the beginning of this entire thing. And I was, there were certain visual cues during the pandemic, visual representations of how the world was changing. And in the beginning, like the photo of the empty shelves, I didn't really have access to visuals like that being home with the kids. So that also changed how I was trying to represent what the pandemic meant by what I had access to visually.
Let's pull up that slide so that we can show it as well.
Yeah, so I remember that like it was yesterday. I feel like, yeah, that was definitely the start of all of it. Like I said, my son was in daycare 3 days a week, and my daughter was in first grade. And I met a friend of mine for coffee, and he happened to have a friend in Italy, so he was a little more kind of aware of what was going on, especially in Europe. Mm-hmm. And he said, I'm going to the grocery store. This is coming here. I'm going to pick up some stuff. And I was kind of like, okay, it really just, it was on the radar, but you just never thought that would happen here. Yeah. And so I said, all right, fine. I'll go to the grocery store with you. I was just there Monday, but fine, I'll go. And as soon as we walked in, it was just, reality struck you in the face. There was, a million people there and the empty shelves, and it just, like I said, that's the way that I process the world. I just happen to have my camera with me. I usually always do. And I just started taking pictures because it was like, it was a point of focus, and, just started photographing the empty shelves, and it really was, it was quite shocking. And I know there was a lady at the grocery store that started got very angry at me for taking pictures. I'm not sure why. Everybody had their cell phones out, but maybe because I had a camera, I don't know. But she was on her radio. There's a woman in aisle 6 taking pictures. So I grabbed that. I actually bought that bag of flour and kind of ran out.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and it was, I think the next week, it was perhaps the very following week, because once it all started to snowball, it seemed to happen really fast. I think it was the next week that the schools shut down. And that was the last time I was in a grocery store. My husband he had to go to work, like physically to his office throughout the entire pandemic. So he was our outside guy, we called him, and he would go grocery shopping at like 8:30 at night after the kids went to bed. And so that was the last time I was in a grocery store, which is not terrible. I'm not complaining.
Yes, that's very true.
Yeah, I've done it for years, so it's fine.
Well, you mentioned your kids, and the next image that you shared is one of them.
Yep. Yeah. So in the beginning, it's funny to think about, because now that we're a year into it, it's still very different. It's probably worse now. The numbers are obviously worse now than they were then, but the fear then was different. There were still so many unanswered questions and so many blanks. And I feel like the month of March, really the fear was kind of it was a buzzing fear. It was an excitable fear, because I feel like every single day there was information, and there were press briefings, and there were, all of these things happening. And one of the questions was, how does it affect children? And how does it affect children with pre-existing conditions? And my son, Charles, who's pictured here, he has asthma. So that was another reason that we didn't go anywhere. I didn't go to a grocery store. I'm the one that's dealing with him the most, not my husband, because he's, at work and everything else. So we really didn't go anywhere, because we weren't sure if he was at a higher risk, what category he was put in. At the beginning, I think it's really important to remember how little we knew.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this image in particular really struck me. My daughter has exactly the same mask, actually, so I immediately went to it. And I think one of the hard things for her too, emotionally, is that she's old enough to have seen the commercials and seen the press briefings and hear this, asthma is a danger, and I have asthma, and what does that mean for me? So I love the way that you were able to capture that in him.
Yeah, and it's something that he's been diagnosed with asthma since I believe he was 9 months old. He had pneumonia, and that kind of kicked off the whole investigation. So he's 4 now. In this photo, he's 3. So yeah, it's such a normal part of our lives. Every time that he, gets any kind of cold or anything like that, he has to do his nebulizer, and he has his inhalers and everything like that. And it's just such a part of your life. You don't really think about it. It's just part of Charlie's routine. Brush your teeth, do your inhaler. So then all of a sudden it felt like there was this spotlight on him, and, all of a sudden it was a problem. We never feared for him. His asthma is rather mild. He doesn't have asthma attacks. It's very under control. And all of a sudden there was this spotlight on him. And then I felt that the other thing too was early in the pandemic, there was this kind of this asterisk next to anybody that had a pre-existing condition, where it was, every single person that passed away from COVID, there was always this mention of, but they had diabetes, they had this, they had that. And I started to think about that a lot, was that, wait, but my son, my 3-year-old son, he has an underlying medical condition. It doesn't make it any less devastating if something were to happen to him, so that definitely became a huge part of my work too. I made a lot of photographs of him with his inhaler and his nebulizer and everything like that, because just trying to process how the world was okaying these people passing away, like telling us it's not that big of a deal unless you have a pre-existing condition. It definitely was a big part of the early fear.
Then we move on to April. beyond that kind of initial grasp of fear and panic, and what were you feeling when you got to this image?
This image was also, definitely early on, and it was, I feel like once April came around, maybe the middle of April, the fear changed. The anxiety it didn't stop being about the actual disease, but I feel like it shifted because of this plateau of, all the questions that could have been answered at that time quickly were all answered. So it became this kind of plateau of anxiety of, wait, how long is this going to last? That excitement, not excitement, excitement's the wrong word, but that kind of, frenzied, the information coming out, and every single day there was something else on the news to watch or read or whatever. And all of a sudden, when April, May, June, when those hit, it kind of plateaued into this, wait, how long are we going to be doing this for? I thought that this was, at this point, I still thought it was temporary, and I remember my sister was pregnant and she was due in June. And I remember we had a conversation that was, oh, but that's in June. Cause I was like, oh, you're going to have a baby in this. How is that going to work? And she was, oh, that's in June. Like, we still thought that it was far more temporary than it's been. And so this photograph, I really think, illustrates that feeling that all of a sudden April, May hit, and you're just kind of, it was very dark. We're inside looking out, what's happening. How long is this going to be? What are we supposed to do? We can't be in this house any longer. So that for me is hard to look at. The kids not being able to go to school, and and every morning my husband went off to work, and we were all kind of, he just sits in an office, but still you just don't know, is he exposed? Is he going to get sick? So yeah, this to me really illustrates that plateau of anxiety.
And then the next image that you shared shows a little bit more of the outside world.
Yeah. So of course, once it started to get warmer, I started to go outside, and it also became, how many photographs can I make of my kids being bored inside? But yeah, it was like the darker side of it with people started to leave the images, and it really started to be this empty world, and all the things that we were missing. I mean, simple things that, going to the movies. Yeah, I mean, like I said, people started to disappear from my images because they felt like they were disappearing from all of our lives. It was a very isolating time. And then also, just like I said, trying to go out and find those visual cues. How can I illustrate what's happening in the world? Obviously, I'm watching on social media and things like that, these amazing photojournalists really deep in it, photographing what's happening. And there's an envy there, because I don't have that mobility. So how can I, in the situation that I'm in with my kids, my son having asthma, how can I illustrate the changes and the fear and what's going on safely and with them? So it became things like this, trying to find those cues in the world in a safe way. This is one of my favorites. I'm not sure how well I don't think it illustrates the pandemic, but it definitely illustrates the feeling. I took a bath one night to be by myself. My husband came home and I was like, I'm going in the bathtub. It was a long day. And yeah, it's just that the dark feeling of get me out. I can't be here anymore. How can I get out? But it's not ending. No matter what you think, what you feel, you can't break out of it. It's there. And unfortunately, it's still here.
Absolutely.
Yeah, this is, it's not funny at all, but at the same time, looking back, it is a little, just being, I was a stay-at-home mom before. So people thought that it would be kind of easier for me, but it wasn't. It was not, 24 hours a day at home with the kids Where's Mom? This one's called Keyhole, but in our household, it's called Where's Mom? Yeah.
And I think a lot of us who have lived through the pandemic with young children in the house can really identify with this one.
Self-portrait with children, yeah. They had too much fun making this picture. Squishing Mom. But yeah, I mean, it's just, especially, I love working. I've always loved working. So obviously being a mom and choosing to be a stay-at-home mom, I continued to work freelance, before this happened, even with them being home. I worked a lot for magazines, writing articles and like I mentioned to you earlier, writing technical instructions. And you just kind of adapt your life to the new situation of having kids. And that's what I did for a long time. Was I couldn't go out and do, photo shoots and things like that. It wasn't practical. So I wrote for magazines and, so yeah, you just figure out ways to adapt. But at the same time, when the pandemic hit, it was not just now I'm a stay-at-home mom again. I had a couple months of freedom with my son going to daycare, but it's not the same because you obviously still have that fear. You can't go anywhere. It's not like, oh, daddy's home, I'm going to go out with my friends. Yeah, so it really was a suffocating. It felt like the walls were closing in. What do I do? I'm out of activities. It felt like, I was absolutely doing my best as everybody is, but yeah, there's still a darkness. You want to say that, oh, it's wonderful, quality time with the kids, but no, there's always this underlying suffocation.
Definitely. So then we get to kind of a change where your focus goes from kind of directly photographing and documenting this life and to the focus on masks. And can you talk about that change?
Yeah, I think that was, it was a rather easy change. Like I said in the beginning, the visual kind of cue or symbol at the beginning were the empty shelves. And that wasn't something that I really had access to photographing. And then when masks came around, that was all of a sudden this epiphany of, this is a visual marker that I really can grasp onto in a safe way. Mm-hmm. And I had worked for sewing magazines in the past. And so I knew how to sew. And it was all of a sudden everything became lighter because now I had a focus. I obviously had my job taking care of the kids and virtual school and everything like that. But now I had my own focus, and that was designing and sewing masks and photographing masks. And it was this wonderful visual thing that really illustrated the change in our society. And I had full access to that with my kids, with people outside. So it really, all of a sudden, all of my images became lighter because it was just an emotional shift as well. Like I had a point of focus for myself and, something that I could really grasp onto. Yeah, this was a group of women, of artists, and they started sewing masks for healthcare workers because in the beginning, it's incredibly hard to imagine, but there was such mask shortages for healthcare workers. So they started sewing masks, and I reached out to them. They were right in Catskill, local to Catskill, and I reached out to them to offer my technical writing abilities, and I designed a pattern for them with a template that they could print out and hand out or email to volunteers. And I went and shot some photos of them. I didn't have that much time to sew myself, which I felt bad about, but the kids. But as soon as that happened, that, like I said, that really gave me, it kind of just lifted me up. Finally, I had something to do, something of value.
So then in the next couple pictures, we have images of some of the business owners and businesses in Catskill.
Yeah, this was definitely something, because at this point, I'm not exactly sure, this may have been May. It was finally warm. so I could go outside safely and photograph people. And it was also something that my husband and I had kind of committed to do at least once a week, was order food from one of the local restaurants, just to help out. And this is Liam and Laura, and they they own two places. They own the Avalon Lounge, which was, a music venue, and and they had food as well, but it was mainly a music venue. And they had to figure out a way to pivot and, make money, even though obviously, it's been a year. When are you going to be able to have live events again? So they had this, like, a small Korean menu at the bar, and they became a full-time Korean takeout restaurant. They just had to pivot. And I was so inspired by how a lot of the restaurants were making it work. There was a lot of, kind of weight on them, and it would have been easy to just fold, but this is their lives. And it was really inspiring to watch how they pivoted. And they also have High Low, which is a cafe and bar. But yeah, so they were really inspiring to me. And I wanted to go out and document that, and really point a light on what these other people were doing. And that's John Michael. He owns a wine store, and he did something that I just thought was so brilliant. You can see on the sides of the photo, he put all the wines with photos and descriptions and prices, and he printed them all out on, just 8.5 by 11 pieces of paper, and taped them in the window, so people could stand outside and they could peruse all the different wines, and then just go to the front door, knock, he'd open the door and order the wines. And it was completely safe and, just brilliant. And so I loved talking to people and figuring out, the incredibly creative ways that they were continuing on, under this incredible pressure. And you can see too, I think it's funny, and I kind of just noticed it. He has the same exact mask as Liam and Laura did, and that's because Lale, who was the co-founder of the Masks for People group, she was giving the local business owners masks.
Wow. That's great.
Yeah, this is just another example of how I feel like things became lighter in my work after the masks showed up. This one's at home haircut. And yeah, I'm not a stranger to cutting my own hair, but it was just another one of those visual representations of how things changed. All of a sudden it wasn't a weird thing. I've cut my own hair in the past, and people are like, "Oh, I love your haircut." And as soon as I say I did it myself, they're like, "Oh, it's a little weird." But all of a sudden it was the norm. And so many people were doing that, that it was just another thing that, these things pop up on your radar, and you're like, all right, well, I have to take a photo of that. That's a huge part of our new normal. Yeah, that one is, the teachers did a teacher parade. They did, when the schools closed when did they close? In March, they did one. And it was just, it was a silly little, the teachers just driving around in their own cars, but it was such a huge thing. My daughter was in school. Like I said, my son was in daycare, but it was such a huge thing for my daughter to just not feel forgotten. And then this was another one they did in June at the end of the year. And it was, such a simple thing, but such a huge thing for the kids. Yeah. And I was just so thankful that they did that. But again, it was another example of the creativity and, kind of thinking outside the box and figuring out how to continue to be in society and be connected and not give up, and all of these little things kept people in the community connected, through some sort of creativity.
Definitely. So then the next photo is one of a series, and we'll see more later in the slideshow, of images that you did of community members wearing masks.
Yep.
So can you talk a little bit about your visual decisions here. One of the things that I notice about it is the stark contrast between when you see handmade masks by people, they're so often so colorful and bright. And you chose to go with black and white with these photographs. And I also wonder, I know, having followed your Instagram through some of this, that these were done on the street. Is that correct?
Yeah. So this was, yeah, or I think I started this in May, and it was really in the very beginning, it was more a selfish, just a selfish decision, not selfish bad, but selfish decision for me to, as a photographer and a photographer of people, I really needed to be outside, and I needed to be talking to people and documenting. That's really, I love photographing people. I love history. I love documenting. It's the way that I, understand the world and I absorb the world. So I just needed to do that. And finally it was warm enough. I felt like I could do it safely. I wasn't going to put my family at risk. And I just really wanted to go out and be in the community like other people were, but in a way that made sense for me personally. And I chose the black and white just because, I shot them all in color, digital, and I ended up going with black and white because I really wanted it to be about their eyes and not so much about the mask. Cause I'm with you. This was one of the masks I made. So when I saw her on the street, she didn't have a mask. And I had made a bunch of masks and brought them with me because I don't think I quite realized yet that people didn't have access to masks. I can sew, so it just didn't occur to me that, oh my gosh, well, where do people buy them? I knew you couldn't buy medical masks, but I wasn't fully aware. And it just hadn't thought about it. Where would you even buy a mask? So I brought them with me just because I didn't want to miss an interesting person or an interesting face because they didn't have a mask. So I brought them with me just for that reason. I knew that some people didn't have them or didn't want to wear them. So that's why I brought the mask initially. And like I said, I chose the black and white because I really wanted it to be, I wanted everybody's mask to be kind of on a level playing field. I wanted the eyes really to be what it was about. I didn't want because color, I love color. I always shoot in color, but it can be a distraction.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. So then you went from going out and photographing people and handing out some masks to a full-fledged installation on Main Street to hand out masks. And we'll see that later. We'll see that at the end.
Yeah.
But can you talk about your inspiration and how you got there and why you decided to do that?
So, like I said, when I first went out, I had no intentions for the project. I didn't even think it was a project at first. It just was a way for me to have kind of some alone time away from the kids, and also to be able to document, and to use this visual representation of what was going on, and to hand out masks. So I didn't have an idea for a project yet, but living in Catskill, which, there's not a lot, it's not a huge city. It being in the evening, it being a pandemic, whatever, there was a lot of time between, I was just sitting in this little park on Main Street waiting for people to walk by. It was like fishing, so there's a lot of time to sit and mull things over before I'd even see another human being. So I started thinking about the masks and why people didn't have the masks, because everybody that didn't have a mask that I offered one to was, more than willing to take it and put it on. So I was thinking, well, why don't they have them? And then I started realizing and talking to people and seeing that they just didn't know where to get one. They'd be sold out. They didn't even know where to get one, but they knew they had to have one. So I started thinking, well, what can I do? Why aren't people wearing them? How can I get them to people? So the kind of the beginnings of that, of the installation started to come while I was just sitting around waiting for people, to let me take their picture. And at some point, and I'm not really sure when, but it was kind of in the middle, I'd say, of the project, I saw on Instagram an installation by the artist Nick Cave. And I think it was it was a one-day thing. And he taped masks in Ziploc bags to a window and had work inside the window. And it was just kind of this one-time happening, art installation. And it just was like, oh, duh, that's how I can do it. So as soon as that hit me, as I sat there, I would go out once, maybe twice a week to photograph people. And I just built the whole thing in my head, from what size they would be, what materials, how would I get what hooks should I use? All of those things. I just started building it in my head. I loved the idea of having as much diversity as I possibly could, everything from different genders and ages and races, everything, so that people would see, because also as the project went on, the masks became more and more controversial, which is still mind-boggling to me, but they became more and more a dividing point. So I was really hoping, the more people that I could get involved in having their portrait taken and in images in the installation, I thought would normalize it better. So if you're, say, a teenager like she is, then other teenagers would see that and say, oh, I guess if she's wearing one, I guess it's okay if I do. So then it switched to kind of being about as much diversity and as many different faces as humanly possible. To normalize it.
All right. And then you talked about the inspiration when we talked before that came out of the Enough is Enough rally, which was one of the protests that came out of Black Lives Matter this summer. So can you talk about how that inspired you and what you witnessed in Catskill?
Well, first of all, I was just incredibly impressed at Catskill pulling this together. And just, the entire thing was incredibly powerful. It was incredibly peaceful. It was, moving. It was wonderful. And of course, it was an opportunity. It was a weekend. So I had, my husband was home. I could go. And I knew I had to photograph it. It was just, I was trying to photograph every single thing that I could. As safely as I could. And I made masks to bring with me. I had my backpack full of masks in case anybody didn't have any. And I went and I photographed it. And it wasn't until the very end when I realized, I kind of just moved in there and found the organizers and, I want to take pictures of everybody. And I realized that it was this group of women that organized the entire thing. And it was so, obviously the rally itself was inspiring and powerful, but on another more, literal standpoint, it was incredibly inspiring how well they organized this whole thing, with a perfect starting place and with speakers, and they had all the right equipment. And, it was just from a technical standpoint, they just did such an amazing job. Everything went off without a hitch. They had different, there were speakers at the school, and then we marched to the police station, and there were speakers there, and then to the courthouse and speakers there. And, they had these t-shirts and, everything was just designed and organized so beautifully. And I don't know all of the women, but I know one of them, Chelsea, and she's a nurse at my kid's doctor's office. She has a daughter herself, a young daughter. And so I really was inspired by the fact that, I had been building this installation and this wish in my head for weeks, but yet not actually taking any steps towards putting it together, And as soon as I, witnessed this rally and what Chelsea and her friends were able to do, I was just like, come on, Lucy, get up, do it. If you care, do it. They're the limitations that are so easy to lean back on don't mean anything. This is somebody that's in the same boat as you and was able to put together something so incredible. So yeah, I knew I had no excuses at that point, and that really was, I think it was, I don't know, a week or two later, and I had the installation up. You know, I started immediately after this trying to find a storefront and ordering supplies, and yeah, it was really inspiring what these women were able to do. Yeah, I mean the people there, and you know, this is Catskill, it's crazy. The people there, the people involved, it was just so wonderful. Obviously, I look at this now and I'm like, oh my gosh, we were all so close to each other. I don't know if I'd do that now, but yeah.
Yeah, I grew up in Catskill. I know some of the people, some of the speakers, and
Mhm.
for the pandemic, I wasn't able to come, but I was just floored seeing the coverage that I saw online and these images once again. It was very inspiring.
Yeah, it was incredible. Yeah, I was so glad. I mean, it was something that I wish I could have brought my daughter with me, but yeah, because of the pandemic, I was like, no way. And also when I photograph, especially events like this, I'm everywhere. I didn't want to lose her in a crowd.
Definitely, definitely. So from there, we'll go back to some of your mask portraits. And I wanted to talk about what you learned from this project about your community.
I think the first thing that stuck out to me, I mean, coming right from the Enough is Enough rally right into that, is I just realized how diverse of a community it actually is. I was concerned in the beginning, not concerned, I guess is the wrong word, but I just kind of mulling over like, am I going to be able to get enough, different faces? I was, a little bit concerned about the diversity, but within the first night, I mean, I covered so many different ages and races and everything. So I had absolutely no trouble at all. Pretty much covering every single person you could imagine. And also people's willingness. I mean, I think there was really only, I don't know, 2 people that didn't want their photo taken, but not a single person that was offered a mask said no. That was something else that I learned, not just about the community, but about people as well. Is I think that, everybody was so thankful when offered a mask that was, comfortable and colorful, and people were just so thankful because they knew that they had to wear them. But it kind of maybe changed their perspective a little bit when I offered them this handmade mask, with a cool pattern. They got to pick their own pattern. I had them all laid out, and how willing people were. I feel like if you approached them, in a kind way, as opposed to, some people can be like, you gotta put your mask on, but I feel like if you approached people in a certain way, they were very willing to listen, and they were very willing to try it out. But the vast majority of people honestly had their own, which is another thing I love about the photos, is that, this one in particular, this is Blake and his dog, and, the different handmade masks or the different things that people used, whether it's a bandana. Yeah, I just loved seeing the different in the beginning, because now, I mean, you can order them from anywhere, so it kind of loses a little bit of its luster. But the handmade masks and the things that people used in the beginning to act as a mask were really incredible. Yeah, I mean, the eyes, you just, that I just wanted that to be the focus, and it really is. It's funny because your mind really makes up the rest of the face when the face is missing.
Absolutely. Can I ask, this is probably the same answer for the shooting in black and white versus color, but I thought it was interesting that you shot these on the street, but decided to bring a backdrop with you. So they look like studio portraits at the same time, even though they're people on the street. And it kind of tweaks that, classic photograph on the street that we're so familiar with. So how did that come about?
I think that's just a personal thing. I mean, I very much love everything to be straight and orderly. And I think that if there had been a way to do it inside in a studio setting, I probably would have. I'm glad that there wasn't, because I love the natural light, but I think I just didn't want any distractions. I didn't want anything happening in the background. I just wanted it to really have, I mean, there's an emotion to them, of course, but it's also somewhat like a specimen, it's a document. It really was important to me that it just be a document, that it be kind of this 8x10 document. These are the people, this is what happened, no distractions. But then of course, because they are people, there's always going to be an emotion.
Yep.
Yeah. And I love that, because it's like, I'm not doing anything to give to me, it's as objective as a photographer can be. Obviously you can't be objective, even if you're claiming, that you're just documenting an event or something, but you're still choosing what to shoot, how to crop it, what to keep in, what to crop out. So you can't be objective, but I wanted this to be me being as objective as humanly possible. No color distractions, no background distractions, asking every single human being that walked by. There was not a person that I said, nah, not that person. Every single person that came by, I just wanted everybody to have the potential to kind of, show their story or be part of it, no matter what they looked like, who they were, what age they were. Really just obsessed with that document.
So we'll close with a shot of the actual installation. And I was wondering also how this project felt different to work that you've done before, and how was it similar? Were there ways that it connected?
I think that, the fact that it's people is the same. I love photographing people. It's funny to me, I know many other photographers, and it's just funny, somebody that's like an architectural photographer photographing buildings or something. I couldn't imagine. But it's funny that people, they just have their thing that they love. So, and mine is people. So in that way, it was similar. Portraits are my absolute love. It's different because it is black and white. Usually I mostly shoot in color. So that was a big difference. And also just an installation. I'd never done an installation before. So this was my first, which was another thing that kind of subconsciously was holding me back and allowing me to think about it and dream about it, but not actually take that initial step forward, because I'd never done it before. And of course, because it was the pandemic, it's not like I could get people to help me. It was fully by myself with the kids at home, so I had to do all of the groundwork for everything at home with my kids, trampling all over everything. But yeah, so the installation and it's somewhat, I didn't want it to be political, and I still don't really see it as political, but social, I guess, a social issue. And that wasn't something that I'd focused on in the past. And that felt, that was another inspiration from watching the Enough is Enough rally, was that I can do that. I can take up, social issues and make work out of it while also helping. So it was huge for me for it to not just be an installation, but also to be a mask distribution site. So that was a huge part. And I told Jessie, the wonderful woman who donated the window space, she owns the building. And I told her, I'm going to have masks, up as long as I can. But as soon as I can't get any more masks up, I'll take it down. Because to me, you can't have one without the other. It can't just be there empty. It has to be doing something for the community, or else it makes no sense.
Mm-hmm. And so you actually got a grant to be able to provide masks for longer than you were expecting, correct?
Yeah, it was through fundraising. So I did, just a GoFundMe. I was hand making the masks, all of the masks to begin with, which was ridiculous. I was only making 12 a day. And then in the morning, the kids and I would go down and hang them on the hooks. And it just was, it was not sustainable at all. Then I got Lyme disease, which wasn't, I wanted to sleep, not make these masks. But I set up a GoFundMe and I was able to buy, it was like 500 masks. And I dyed them all because, again, it was a huge, it was a very important thing for me to have the masks be cool, because I definitely thought that that was something that made people more likely to wear them if they thought that they were cool or somehow added to their outfit, or, so I was able to do that. Once those ran out, the building owner, she kindly did her own personal fundraising for another batch of around 500. And now those are about to run out. So I've been making more, to hang. So I don't know what's happening next. I don't know if we're gonna fundraise more, or if I just keep making them as I can make them. I don't know, but it definitely, it's one of those things where I kept thinking like, well, this won't be relevant in a couple months, or we won't need this in a couple months. And it just keeps going and seems more relevant now than it even was back in May, June, so yeah, we're just kind of, doing our best and making it happen. And I know I don't have the exact number, but it's been about 1,500 masks that have gone out into the community through the installation. And then, of course, I go out to things like the Enough is Enough rally and hand them out personally. There was also a pride parade, Catskill's first pride parade. I went and photographed that as well and handed out masks. Halloween, my kids get embarrassed. It's, we went out and did this kind of social distant trick-or-treating on Main Street. And again, it's like, Mom, do you have to bring the masks? And I just have my backpack full of masks just in case. So I really, it's been wonderful, because it's, like I said, it's been a point of focus through this whole thing for me. But also helps, it continues to be relevant. It continues to be a thing that people really need, to make it normal, and then also to have access.
Definitely. Well, I want to, just before we close, go back from that physical. So I think one of the things that's really interesting about your work in this period is that it exists in the physical space, in the installation and the handing out masks, but it also exists in the virtual space on Instagram.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the salves to not being able to go to galleries and go to museums during this time has been following artists on Instagram and seeing the different pandemic projects that they've been working on. And you mentioned Nick Cave and his mask installation as well. Were you inspired by anyone else working during this time? So many people, like you said, I've never spent so much time on social media in my life. Part of it is negative. There's always a negative side, I think, to social media, but there's also been an incredible benefit in the fact that, things like this, there were online classes and forums and all these things that I never had access to living here, that all of a sudden, you can just, you can go online, you just sign up for free, and all of a sudden you're at some sort of symposium with, photographers or editors or whoever that you only dreamed of listening to speak. So that's been wonderful. But I can't think of anybody off the top of my head, but it's just, I've been incredibly inspired by all of the amazing photojournalists that I've been watching on Instagram, people that, I never considered myself political before. So people that I kind of weren't on my radar before. I have a slight photojournalist tilt to my work. So I probably should have been aware of them, but I never watched it before. But yeah, so just watching these photojournalists at the White House, just all over the world, capturing what's going on in just such an incredible way. That's not just straightforward, but these just beautiful, beautiful images coming out of the pandemic, and everything, that's happened over the last year has just been remarkable. These people that were once known as just documenting the world are now, incredible artists, illustrating what's going on, but adding a layer of artistic expression and emotion that I think they weren't recognized for before. Well, thank you. Thank you so much for
No, thank you for having me.
the museum is so grateful to have a selection of your photographs and masks as part of our collection. We have been actively collecting materials from COVID to talk about the experience of New Yorkers in different parts of the state. And that's a collection that we continue to work on. But again, so grateful to have your work as part of that and to have you here today.
Yeah, no, it's an an absolute honor, and the State Museum is something we've definitely missed during COVID.
We miss our exhibit halls being full too. So
Oh yeah, we miss the carousel.
thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for having me.